Diversity is a word you probably hear far too often. It's a concept that has captured the landscapes of business, media, and academia. But one company beams as having one of the messiest track records of any in their pursuit of the almighty shrine of diversity: Google. After news broke of former engineer James Damore's memo, which audaciously pointed out the differences between men and women, the sirens were sounded. He was fired, of course, and has filed a lawsuit highlighting their discriminatory hiring practices. And so we visit the next chapter in this tale of Google's dash for diversity. A man by the name of Arnie Wilberg, a Google employee, has been fired. He alleges, like Damore before him, that Google engages in actively discriminatory hiring practices. In the hierarchy of diversity, the more intersectional you are, the better. And for Google today, nothing is less desirable than white and Asian men, as the company is 91% white and Asian and 69% male. This is problematic to Google, you see, so they're frantically trying to pump up their non-white Asian male numbers. This is because it presents a dilemma to them. How can they lecture everyone else on diversity if their own staff are so uniform in their ethnic composition? Perhaps Google is owed some credit for not overlooking the long-standing hypocrisy of many in the diversity at all costs movement, which is the exclusion of Asians from the idea of white privilege. This looks like Google's induction of Asians to a supposedly privileged class, which is bestowed upon any group that does better than any other group. This doctrine demands that any unequal outcome just must be the result of injustice perpetrated somewhere down the line. Understanding this is central to understanding what motivates the ridiculous measures Google is taking and why they won't work, even if they were desirable to begin with, which they aren't. This doctrine has inspired Google to erect a number of guardrails to keep whites and Asians out. Before being fired, Mr. Wilberg says that he was punished with worse performance reviews for criticizing these policies to his managers. How did recruiting managers with Google go about this task? They instituted an internal diversity tracker, a document that tracked diversity goals, which is to say how many non-Asian minorities they could steamroll their ranks with. One email unearthed a hiring manager telling his or her subordinates to only consider candidates from historically underrepresented groups. This is many things, racist to be sure, but it's also a futile and stupid aim. Google is never going to be able to have an equal representation of every group within its ranks, because it simply isn't a career path that's attractive equally across groups. Blocking talented candidates on the basis of their genitals or skin color doesn't just disadvantage the otherwise qualified candidates themselves, but makes the company a less competitive and robust business. This silly practice does, however, open up a wider conversation, the infiltration of radical social justice into businesses writ large. Political polarization isn't limited to Twitter, Facebook feeds, or viral videos. The individuals who comprise these organizations often have strong political opinions themselves. This has put many companies in the precarious situation of catering to half the market, and their employees too. In trying to walk that tightrope, they're often being influenced negatively from the inside, and not in a direction that is in their long-term interest. The radical social equality types who are driving this rapid change in company culture simply don't like hierarchies, competence, or the profit motive. While short-sightedly attempting to pander to this emergent strain of thought, executives miss that these ideas don't stop at racial dogmas like privilege theory. They fundamentally consider capitalist gains as ill-gotten. They consider all power exploitative. Simply trying to appease their ideology on the racial front won't appease their never-ending contempt for traditional structures. Any attempt to ignore that is only to dig your own grave. In their view, solving problem A isn't enough. There's also B, C, D, E, so on and so forth to consider. This is likely why we've seen so many censorship of conservatives and sensible liberals alike on the platform. But the central problem with dissenting from the cult of diversity is that if you dare acknowledge that groups are often interested in different fields, you're branded as saying that they aren't welcome in that field or aren't cut out for it. As with all half-witted appeals to character assassination, this simply isn't true. Sometimes the reasons have nothing to do with systemic bias or discrimination. Sometimes they have to do with the interests of the people themselves. Absolutely, we should remove any and all barriers if they're based purely on identity, but is the answer to that problem to add barriers based on identity? Does it make sense to answer the question of, by all indications, non-existent discrimination with discrimination? Can we ever fix the problem, if it is a problem? If it is a problem, is it a bigger one than the problem of intellectual uniformity and the punishment of different viewpoints? Intellectual uniformity can only lead to a rigid structure, totally resistant to change. In a constant evolving market, an inflexible organization like that cannot survive because skin color says almost nothing about a person's experience, competence, or future performance. This practice of screening on the basis of race was apparently so prevalent among YouTube's specific 20 or so recruiters that Google launched an investigation that ran through 2017, which they brushed under the rug, deleting emails and references to the previously mentioned diversity quotas. Frantically attempting to collect as many different colored humans as they can like crayons, they launched a program called Project Mirror, which made sure that if you were black, you got a black interviewer, and so on and so forth. One employee thought they were being treated like objects, which is really what you're doing when you're reducing a person to their outward appearance. Even if it's in the name of tolerance and diversity, everyone should be able to agree that this kind of tokenism is utterly dehumanizing for the same minorities they're claiming to champion. It's the inevitable consequence of seeing the group first and the people who compose it second, no matter how noble you claim your intentions are. More and more, it looks like we're caught in a time loop, with Google resurrecting the segregationist corpse of Jim Crow under the banner of tolerance. All of this should sound dystopian to anyone familiar with George Orwell's 1984. War is peace, ignorance is strength, slavery is freedom, and now racism is diversity. And if you disagree, all evidence to the contrary will be shot down the memory hole. It takes an insane amount of mental gymnastics to think that forcing the separation of people is in some way going to bring them together, and it's proving to do just the opposite.